because I know that this is a fantastic topic. I mean, COVID has changed how we do everything, of course, and it's going to affect our communities, right? So
Right.
my friend Bill, he's one of my most treasured colleagues in KM, and as well as instruction design and Agile. And I worked with him for several years on things. I am so excited that he is willing to speak today, and I'm sure it's going to be a great session. So let me turn it over to Bill.
Okay. Well, great. Can you all see the slides?
Yes.
Come here.
Okay.
Screen time.
Okay. That's all right, Kathy. Okay. Sorry about that.
Sorry. Come on. She's not coming.
That's
Come
okay.
on.
Just leave her alone. Okay.
Come here, Cassie. It's screen time.
Oh, one of the fun things about quarantine is putting up with family members and cats. Sorry about that. All right. So yeah, we were talking, Tara and I were talking about a month ago, and we were talking about some different topics and some ideas, you know, especially for November and December. And I don't know if we're going to have a December meeting because you know how the holidays kind of affect us. And one of the things I talked about, well, we're going to do this, we want to do before Thanksgiving. And I thought it might be kind of fun to kind of revisit, you know, some of the traditional topics in knowledge management and see how they've been changed. So I want to talk a little about, you know, community of practices, and I'm just going to go through some of the slides. And like I said, you folks have some expertise. Please add in, please chime in. And then I developed a list of 5 questions that I'd like to ask and kind of get the collective brain power. And just think about where our communities of practice are, you know, where they were and where they're going and what's going to change afterwards. Okay. So we just kind of set where we are. And I heard someone talk about people, practices, and processes as a community of practice idea and such. So when I was growing up and going through knowledge management, I learned about, you know, community of practices as a domain, practice, and community. And I am very sure you all have heard of the classic story about the Xerox repairman. And that's, you know, Wagner, you know, basically was watching these guys and learned how this kind of community of practice formed. And you had these Xerox repairmen that would go around and they would trade ideas and tips on how to build these Xerox photocopiers, because I'm pretty sure a lot of you all have experienced the very stubborn and crazy ways that photocopiers work. And it's not in the manual half the time. So this is how, you know, this kind of organic community of practice grew, right? You've all heard that story before, haven't you? Yeah, so, you know, the theory was pretty interesting. And that kind of caught my attention back a long time ago when I was starting out in government as a paralegal, because I realized our paralegals, a lot of us had communities of practice. And we're dealing with the different court systems, we're dealing with the different filings and these things. So that led me to start really working with that. And I've been working with communities of practice for a long time. So this is kind of the level set definition I use. Is there any questions, comments, any different perspectives from what you've heard on that definition? Is this pretty complete? And I know some of you were talking about, let's see, we had, was it Gladys? You did a presentation this morning about communities of practice. Does this kind of follow with what you were talking about? Might be on mute.
This is Ray. I was also present at the presentation and kind of mentoring Gladys on this. The only thing I would add to Domain in terms of area to share interest is a really purpose, a reason for being there. What's the community trying to achieve? And
right.
Domain doesn't quite capture that, but it's kind of implicit, but it's good to make it explicit, like why are we talking about not just the subject, but why are we talking about this subject? You know, why are we getting together as Xerox engineers? What are we trying to achieve here? And generally it's about improving the skill of the practitioner.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I fully agree with that. And that's why sometimes when I see what people are calling a community of practice, it's more of a community of interest, you know?
Yeah. Yeah,
And
exactly.
more, yeah, exactly. So like, you know, you like your favorite TV shows, that's more of a community of interest. You're not really establishing any better qualities or standards. And yeah, absolutely. It's like we want to get together, and it's with the paralegals. We want to be better paralegals. We want to be able to file our court cases faster and get through our work faster so we can be more successful. And I don't know if anyone's read this article. I found this was really helpful when I was kind of looking at this subject, communities of practice and landscapes of practice. And I don't know, and I've heard also called landscapes of learning. And this is a 2019 article for management learning. And I have copies of this if anyone likes. I sent these to Tara so we can pass these around if people would want a copy. But I like the way it kind of put together these multiple levels of practice. And one of the things I think about with communities of practice is, you know, you have the local communities. And like you said, practitioners are connected and mutually engaged. We're trying to do stuff together to help make ourselves better. Okay. And then I'm seeing networks of practices. So I'm thinking about in my own area, we have human resources. And that can be a landscape of practice because there's all kinds of different, there's a body of knowledge of HR, and then there's local communities. Like I'm a trainer and developer. So we have our own community of practice, so the Association of Talent Development, and make more of a network of practice, but we're really focused in that area. I know some other people are focused in compensation, some are focused on benefits. So there's the landscape of HR, and then there is the different networks of how we all kind of network with each other, and then our local communities of practice. So I was trying to think with knowledge management, are we a landscape? Are we a network? Or are we an actual community of practice? I want opening up to you guys.
Why does it matter what you call it?
Okay. Doesn't matter what you call it? Can you say more?
Well, you can split it down infinitely. So why get tangled with what you name it?
Okay.
If people coming together
Uh-huh.
for whatever reason, so interest, community of practice, what does it matter?
Uh-huh. Well, I like that. And I kind of want to go back with what Ray said, which is what is the purpose? So I can see maybe kind of breaking it down because I want to be a really good trainer and developer. So I want to carve out that niche. And maybe in knowledge management, folks want to be an expert in communities of practice or SharePoint. They may want to they want to have a niche in it. So I can see where you're saying, yeah, the whole area of knowledge management. But I would argue that it's pretty big. Can we be really good in all aspects of knowledge management?
Set it up.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does make a difference when you're trying to organize these things and get kind of the governance of it. And I like the HR example is a good use case. You know, people that benefit that they're all in HR, which is kind of an umbrella organization of HR professionals, but there are some that specialize in organizational development and are not interested so much in dispute resolution or employment contracts and things like that. So you can get a kind of segmentation within a broader community, and sometimes communities can go one way or another. So you start off with HR professionals, and as the community gets bigger, then people want to specialize, and you get this kind of bifurcation of communities and splitting of communities. And sometimes it can work the other way. You might get separate areas of HR professionals who collide at conferences and suddenly realize, hey, there's a bigger world out there, and we should really collaborate with and join with and discuss with other HR professionals that are not allied. And I know at the bank we have, at the World Bank, you know, we have over 400 communities of practice there, and there's a whole bunch around finance, but they all specialize in different areas of finance, but they come together within an umbrella while still maintaining their specialisms. So I think it does matter. I agree, it doesn't matter what you call them, but it's important to know if there's a separate specialty or group that I really should be talking with. And you know, the converse of that, not just talking within my bubble, but kind of breaking through those silos and say, hey, there are some things that these other guys do that would be really useful in my area of practice, even though that particular domain is not what I'm looking at.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, it's kind of like the interesting knowledge sharing. I like that, the knowledge sharing. So you have like those different groups and they specialize, but it's also important they share across. That's why I kind of like this, you know, landscape of practice.
Yeah,
sometimes, yeah.
Thank Paul. It's one of the things that kind of the job one is to look at the ecosystem of communities, we call it. We were calling it a competitive analysis for a while, but that didn't really cut it. And the ecosystem is much more aligned to this landscape. What's out there and who's talking about what.
I guess I don't understand where you're going with this, because it ultimately doesn't matter the minutia you're getting into as to what the participants are involved in. They all need a platform. They all need content. They all need some sort of engagement. They all may or may not want networking. So that's the fundamental element for any community, regardless of the topic and the depth of the topic we're dealing with. So where are we heading with it?
Well, great question there, Ivan, and I like what you're saying there. And I want to kind of show an example, okay, of what I was doing at OPM, and you're right. I mean, one of the questions we had there was, you know, we had the Xerox repairman. We would kind of consider that an organic community. It kind of just arose, grassroots top. And then we had a built community. And some of the things I've been struggling with the, you know, communities of practice is I get sometimes from management, hey, we need a community of practice around this, whatever you want to call it. Can you build one for us? And one of the topics, and I don't have an answer here. Sorry, I don't have an answer, but I just like, you know, what are some of the advantages of it? And we'll ask about this later. What are some advantages of having an organic community of practice and also a built community of practice? So I want to show you an example of a built one that we did at OPM, Office Personnel Management. And was anyone involved with something called HR Stat, Human Resources Statistics? No? Okay, so this was a program with OPM where we were forming a community of practice and we were actually engineering one. And the idea behind this was the purpose was to help people that dealt with HR information systems and HR statistical systems, help us modernize our systems in the agencies, help share information and best practices to help all the agencies do a better job with recording HR metrics and statistics and helping us with their strategic planning, okay? So I'm gonna kind of run through this. So this is, and I have a handout for you if you want to see the process model we use. And I borrowed this from Hubert, and I'll show you the book here in a little bit, where we talked about, you know, the steps we took. So we had two phases. We defined the community project. So in other words, we wanted to increase how people, you know, how agencies could better improve their HR metrics and such. So there was our purpose. So kind of like what Ivan was talking about here, where's the context? And we designed a project approach. So our idea was have certain meetings, certain activities. And with that, we wanted to get a platform to support them. And we wanted the community to deliver something. And our idea was to get a body of knowledge, some kind of artifact that we can use, that we can share around with best practices. So if you're in the Project Management Institute, y'all may have heard something called the Project Management Body of Knowledge. And there's other groups out there like the Business Analysis Body of Knowledge. So we were wanting to do HR Stat Body of Knowledge, okay? So that was our first part of the phase one. And then we talked about the community components. We had 8 different ones. I'm not gonna read them to you, but this was all the stuff that we want to do to engineer the community. So how we were going to govern it, who was going to be in it. Like you were talking about, Ivan, user support. What are we going to do with these folks? What are we going to give them? How are we going to work with them? What kind of content? Were we going to have user-generated content, or are we going to create content for them? Kind of a mixture. So all these different parts here. Okay, so we were engineering the community. And then we got ready to launch the community, and we wanted to have sponsors. So we were trying to get a working group together. And we got many folks from different agencies to be our sponsors. And the site, and anyone here familiar with OMB Max, Office Management Budget Max? Okay, So we got to use that ugly site to build our community of practice. And we, you know, we were trying discussion boards and document libraries. We were trying to think about all the things we could do to support the members and really encourage discussion and knowledge creation. Okay. So we had some meetings at OPM where we had these all day long community of practice meetings to get people ready and excited and to share. And we were trying to build the community. And I'll be honest here, I think we were kind of halfway successful with that, but I never really got it to the level of enthusiasm we wanted to. So if someone wants to stop and tell me, how do you make a good community? Tell me.
Are you really talking about the difference between a top-down community, meaning corporate, organizational generated, versus an organic from the bottom up?
Yes.
So my question to you as you were building this slide here, what were you trying to solve a problem for the users? Did they identify it? Did you reach out to your customers and ask them what they needed? Or is this something you wanted them to do?
This is something we wanted them to do, and I like the way you put that, Ivan. Our users really didn't identify the problem. It was our management that identified the problem. So it was the agency senior leadership. And then they told the users, which is, and I see where you're going with that, and that's a great point. I don't think our users felt like it was a bad problem or HR metrics or why it was a problem, but our management was saying, no, we need to fix this. So this was actually kind of came around when President Obama was in her second term management agenda. They wanted to improve employee engagement. And one way of doing this was improving our performance metrics. So, but Ivan brings up a great point. Is this something the users see as a problem, or was it a management problem?
I totally agree with Ivan. This, and I've seen it so many times, like, we need a community of practice. I go, like, we do? Like, why? And then you go looking for the problem to solve. I'll give you a good example. In the World Bank was dealing with a project on, it was demilitarization in Rwanda and Somalia. And this demilitarization means getting the rifles out of the hands of teenagers who've only known guns and violence since they were like 10 years old, getting them out of the army and getting them into universities, factories. So Rwanda had a successful program and Somalia wanted to learn about it. And so someone said, we need a community of practice to do this so they can exchange knowledge and exchange experience in how they did this. And that wasn't the solution at all. Somalia wanted to know how it was done, have the knowledge exchange, take that information and get on with it and do it. They didn't want a 2, 3, 4, 5-year commitment of getting together, meetings, posting, sharing all this stuff. They wanted the knowledge and let us get on with it. And so I think that's a good example where someone said, you need a community of practice, and that's not what they needed at all.
Right.
So, I think Ben said it well in the chat. It only seen self-motivated communities of practice work really well. And even with imposed communities of practice, my approach is always to go and find where it's happening anyway. You'll always, even if there's no community of practice there, you can find some groups or some people that are already sharing knowledge. Go find them and then build up on it, build up on that self-motivation, build up on that enthusiasm to get a more formal community of practice. But starting with the dictate that you need a community of practice is just never going to work.
Yep.
Can I, Jamey, I'm going to pick on you because in the past we've talked a lot about communities and you're being awful quiet. I know you're always a good contributor. So what do you think about all this?
Ivan.
How you like
No,
that?
this is completely in my lane. My mind is fully on communities right now because tomorrow I defend my doctorate and my work is all about communities. So, it's interesting because my background is working in knowledge management. So I'm very familiar with communities of practice and how we traditionally refer to, groups of people who gather for a very specific purpose, particularly in a work environment to accomplish certain tasks. And but the way that I look at communities now is very much based in the work of people like Peter Block, and other folks who are talking not only about, this idea of getting people together for a purpose to work, but also, gathering people to start asking questions and challenging things around them. And, this idea of the responsibility we have to convene one another on and have conversations, the conversations that need to be had. And, to me, I think community involves much more than gathering for the purpose of, completing a task. It has more to do with, what are the, I mean, just think about it, like, what are the other things you get personally? Like when you are involved in a community, a real community, you're not just, getting together, talking about something and getting it done. You're also connecting. You're also, building relationships. You're also, thinking about all these other aspects of that don't really have anything to do with the task, but more have to do with, adding connections, adding value to your life in general. So it's interesting kind of, when you talked about earlier, Bill, the idea of communities that are organic and come up on their own, and communities that are formed for the purpose of task. I almost like hate using the term community for COPs, right? I mean, I would say COP, but I wouldn't call them a community, right?
Mhm.
Because communities of practice have very specific things they want to do that are mostly task or work related if you're talking in a work environment. Whereas real communities have, kind of have more than that in mind. They have other interests. And they really do require a whole lot of additional things to be there, like, trust and safety and respect. And we talk about those things being present in COPs in order for them to work. But, to Ray's point, I think there are a lot of effective COPs that may not necessarily have any of those things in them. They're just there to provide information and knowledge to one another. I mean, I don't want to call out anybody specific, but let's say SICAM, right? Stan Garfield's group. Would you call that a community, or would you call that more like a COP? Because you go there, it started as a listserv, you get information, you exchange information with people, but you're not necessarily connecting with them. You're just conversing with them and exchanging dialogue and, and kind of tit for tat and, exchanging, who's smarter at KM in some of those dialogues. But, is it a community in the true sense of a community, or is it just a group of professionals that are exchanging knowledge and getting benefits out of it?
Yeah.
But maybe not the full range of benefits you get out of being a part of a true community.
So I want to do a little something here, guys, because I like where this is going. So I'm going to skip a bunch of slides because I think we're all pretty good on how community is built. And you got the slides, you're going to look at these. I did want to reference the book I used, which was Hubert St. On's and Deborah Wallace's. And you like the title, Leveraging Communities for Strategic Purpose? Yeah, so you can see where they were going with that. So that was the one that was kind of showing me the top-down piece. But if you want to, I'd like to go with, if your permission, to go ahead and just go into the questions. And I was going to do a breakout session, but is it okay if we stay in the main session? Is that okay? Okay, let's do that. So I have these questions, and I'm going to, let me see, can I get to the chat? I also have these, I can throw these in the chat for everyone. So let me just break out of this. Okay, and I'll put this on the screen for you. And just want to kind of think about some of these questions here. These are ones I brainstormed the other night, thinking about communities of practice and how things are going to be a little bit different. Shoot, hang on a second. Okay. Can you all see the questions okay? Give me a thumbs up if you can see it. Okay, perfect. Let me kick it off to Jamey because I almost sent her a private message about the questions. Okay. So they're in the chat too, if you guys want to look at them. And let's go with the first one here. I was just kind of interested in, with everything about COVID, right? Has anyone noticed any changes with any communities of practice that they're involved in when we, with the shift to full-time teleworking? Has that affected the knowledge exchange? Has that affected any other aspects of communities of practice? Jamey, I see you're shaking your head there, or nodding.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's addressed in some of your other questions, but
Mm-hmm.
I think before COVID, if you were going into Zoom sessions, much of the time if they weren't sort of smaller meetings, they were kind of, somebody talks and everybody listens.
Mm-hmm.
There weren't a whole lot of exchanges. And now I think, in the beginning of COVID, people were, trying to do business in the same way. Like, let's all have somebody talk and then we all sit there. And, and I think everybody figured out pretty quickly that doesn't work, that it doesn't work on a regular day-to-day basis. People are burnt out and feel like they're working 24 hours a day. So I think at least in my experience, what ended up happening when I was still working full-time was we ended up shifting to having a lot more frequent meetings, but much smaller. So I would have coffees with people as opposed to, big meetings with groups that would be considered COPs. If we did have COP meetings, they were more like agile stand-ups, fast meetings, not a whole lot of long conversation because there's too much burnout. But then at the same time, as I was trying to avoid that burnout of having those large meetings, having the sheer number of small meetings that I had to have also created the burnout. So, I think we're still struggling with how do we balance that and keep people feeling like they're connected to the people they work with. I just think about all the people who are brand new in certain work environments, never met their coworkers before. How do you build those relationships?
Yeah, I'm kind of going through that now when you talk about it, because I just went from patent and trademark office to Navy, and I'm in the Inspector General's office at the Navy. I haven't met my coworkers yet. I've met them on Microsoft Teams, and I can see their pictures, and we meet through video, but I have not been in the office with them. In fact, I think they have a cubicle for me in my office, but I'm not sure because I never saw it. So completely onboarded virtually. Yeah. And we're building a training department. So there's, how do you build that community piece? So I like that. It's a good point there.
I think people starting from scratch definitely having a difficulty. Speaking from my own point of view, I've worked remotely for quite a time. I found it has been really incredible for me because there was nothing worse than either being on the phone or being on the screen with 10 people in a conference room, and I was forgotten within 90 seconds. And sometimes I've seen people walk out and I've still been online and there's been an empty conference room there. So to me, it's been fantastic in leveling the playing field. Two, in being more inclusive. A lot of you or most of you work for global agencies or global organizations, and there's always this kind of HQ and the rest type of feeling. And I think it's been much more inclusive in terms of countries that we deal with or regions that we deal with, that no one, if you're in DC, no one has to come for the World Bank. Everyone came to DC once a year or twice a year. That doesn't happen anymore. And you don't have a conference of 200 or 400 people, you have several thousand people. And in fact, a company I worked with for 20 years, Autodesk, would have an annual conference in Las Vegas. There'd be 10,000 people there. And this year, like most companies have gone virtual, they've gone from 10,000 to over 100,000 participating in a 5-day virtual conference. So to me, it's been very enabling and liberating and democratizing and much more participatory. So that, I would say, it's not all good, but I would say that those aspects have been really good. One of the really good things that have come out of COVID.
So Ray, the question I have for you and everybody else is, do you find you retain the information better in a virtual world, or was it better in a face-to-face world?
So I have two answers to that. No, in fact, I have one answer. It depends. If you do the sage on the stage, present for 50 minutes and have 9 minutes rush Q&A, no, you don't retain it. So if you teach I would say badly for the environment, then no. If you teach well, and if you much less presentation, much more facilitation, breakout rooms, I certainly would say that the retention is much higher. So it depends. It depends on your pedagogy or your andragogy, whichever one you want to use.
And the training of the people delivering the content. Now that it's so easy to create virtual meetings, it's easy to create them, it's easy to attend them, but I'm attending a lot more. I'm not sure I'm learning more because I kind of I'm not fully there because it's easy to watch. But I put my cat on one side and watch my,
Well, look at what we're doing now. We're totally engaged. I will, recall all of these conversations and make notes as I go along. I'm taking an online course right now on nonprofit management. And the teachers, I'll call them the teachers, the professors, had not been taught how to use the tools, had not been taught how to facilitate in an online environment. And they're terrible. It's awful. We go from, immediately switch off and go from to turn our videos off and wander off. It's obvious people are not participating. But the ones that do get it and have been taught how to do it, there's great engagement and people are using little tools and doing Jeopardy type games and all kinds of fantastic stuff you can do online. One of the things, Gladys was in the session this morning, one of the things that we've started doing is capturing, everyone captures notes in a Google Doc online in their breakout rooms, and you come out at the end of it with half a dozen pages of spectacular notes, collaborative notes that never happened in a face-to-face environment.
So could we have some other folks talk up? Because it's been great with Ivan and Ray here, but Brenda, I see you nodding a lot and smiling, so kind of want to know why you're smiling.
Well, I was just thinking about some of the meetings that I've participated with this group and learning about the breakout rooms and how much that seemed to make a difference. And then in terms of the comments that people were making about the large annual conferences, of which I've had an opportunity to go to some that I would not have otherwise. One of the things I like about those is that they all seem to keep the recorded sessions. So with a regular annual meeting, I go there. If I miss something, I can't go back and listen to it again. So I think there's some pros and cons of this, but the thing that's intriguing me about, one of the topics for this is how are we going to structure all of this when COVID is over? Are we going to insist that everybody go to the annual meetings again, for example, and leave out, 9,000 people that would have come otherwise? The meetings that we had when I was working and you had half the people in the room and half the people on WebEx or something, and the people on WebEx couldn't hear what was in the room. There's a lot of lessons learned on how to make technology work for us instead of us working with technology. And I think that there are a lot of lessons to be learned. And I was intrigued by this topic, to look towards the future.
Great. Yeah, and I appreciate the comment on there. And I was looking at Phil's in the chat here, and very long answer here, Phil. So could you talk a little bit more about what you mean by this? Phil, of no video?
I don't think he can speak.
Okay. Okay, cool. Okay, splitting your communities. Yeah, exactly. And that was something interesting. And I see some other, and please, everyone chime in. I see Ben there kind of looking thoughtful. One of the things we were trying to create with the HR stat, and we started seeing, we try to do artificial splitting. So we would see a topic and say, okay, we're going to put you guys in this community. And 3 guesses on how well that worked. And you know, that's why one of the things that always kind of brought up to me, because this is why I brought up the build, and this is why, you know, I was talking about it, was I'm more the person, it's got to be kind of organic. You got to build it organically for the community of practice. And one of the things I was thinking about when Ray was talking about this was it's more than just a purpose. So I was thinking about with adjunct faculty. I just had a meeting last night with the adjunct faculty where I teach at University of Maryland, and we share best practices and we share ways of teaching in the class. But there's also this idea of identity formation, that we kind of look at ourselves as adjunct faculty and what that means and what our identity means and how we approach the rest of the university. So Ben, I see you nodding. Do you have some comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, my biggest area of interest is question number 3. And I've been thinking as you guys have been talking that, you know, where I work at FDA, they weren't on a trajectory to get Office 365 and Teams introduced in a timely manner. Let's just say that. COVID forced them to do that because we were all longing for the right tools to use, and Office 2010 didn't provide us any of those tools. And I had to laugh, you know, when we were talking about max.gov. I get asked all the time to demo it and to give talks on max.gov because it's the only tool that we appear to have in the federal government that we can universally use across most of the federal government, if not all of the federal government. And it gives us an opportunity to develop communities with people outside of the federal community where I can't do that at FDA. I can't fire up a SharePoint site or facilitate a Zoom call outside of FDA. It's horrible at FDA. They lock everything down. I know Brendan knows what I'm talking about. So I'm very interested in what we're learning and how technology will be adapted to actually facilitate. You know, when Jamey was talking and I was thinking, yeah, what we're missing is the water cooler talks. We're missing that semi-informal stuff that happens before and after, you know, meetings in rooms, or, you know, when your group's going to get together and talk about something, whether it's a community or a team or whatever. You know, there's some people that just don't feel comfortable even on Zoom talking and being the person that's on the video and the voice that's the only one being heard. They like to go off to the side, you know, when somebody's leaving and say, hey, I really liked what you talked about. You know, can we get together and have coffee and talk about that some more? We're missing the opportunity entirely with, you know, if it's not something that the facilitator, you know, to Ray or someone else's point, you know, if they're horrible at what they do and they're not a good facilitator in this medium, then they're not going to encourage you to do networking before and after the meeting. But yeah, the tools, I think there's going to be a real challenge to learn from this whole thing and develop tools and infrastructure across wide varieties of audiences that could facilitate, you know, communities and really learn, you know, to Brenda's point, learn from what's going on right now. You know, I'm even interested in, as a knowledge management professional and as a librarian, cultivating and harvesting stories about how people dealt with, you know, their cats in the room, or, you know, knowing that you're going to defend your dissertation the next day and, you know, thinking about that while still being on a Zoom meeting and talking about a topic, or the wide variety of things that people are dealing with during this whole thing that, again, to Jamey's point, that sense of real community, even outside of your normal work, you know, infrastructure, or infrastructure is not the right word, the normal paradigms at work. You know, what we're going through right now breaks a lot of that stuff in a good way in many cases. So I really hope that we seize on this, and as knowledge management professionals, lead the way, because nobody else is going to. The IT people are swamped just dealing with the day-to-day of getting security and throughput and networks and stuff to work with all the people that are doing all this stuff. It's incumbent on us to lead the charge in capturing this moment and making the best of it after it's, you know, hopefully over with.
And you totally inspired me. I put a comment in the chat, but like what you got me thinking about was for my master's capstone, we did a project that was it was called Collaboration Coach, and we basically took like the 9 collaboration styles or personas that people typically have when they're collaborating, and we created a guide so that you knew like which how you could, well, so first you could take a quiz that would give you kind of what your primary collaboration style was. And then you could see what other collaboration styles you work best with in combination. And then we had like different tool sets and approaches for each of the collaboration styles to just maximize whatever their preferences were. And I almost wonder if that's something that would be valuable in knowledge management communities as well going forward, is understanding, you know, having people understand what their quote unquote normal collaboration style is. So if you are the person who just sits kind of still and then waits to the end of the meeting to say, hey, I really liked what you said, how can you continue to do that in a virtual environment if that's your style? How can you, you know, and then as a facilitator or convener, how do you talk to people like that, right? Because, you know, what I hate more than anything else is when you get in these calls and you have someone facilitating who's like, everybody must talk, everybody must be on camera, everybody, you know, that it's just not, it's not a kind way to facilitate, first of all. And second of all, it's just, you're really not going to be able to get, you know, the most out of the experience, and vice versa for the people that are attending, right? But it's an art. It's really, it's a hard thing to do, but I think that there are some things that we could create for ourselves that will help us become better facilitators and conveners, but also be better, you know, participants, more comfortable participants in these kind of settings using the different tools.
I agree.
So Jamey, you say for me to stop asking everyone to talk?
No, you're not asking everybody to talk. You're inviting people to talk, but you're not like calling people out.
I know what you mean, because I'm one of the people who like to kind of think about things and like, what do you think, Bill? Well, I don't think right now. How about later? Yeah.
Try working with a bunch of librarians like I do.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
99% of them are introverts and want to think things through, and, you know, can't think on their feet, for at least in my group.
I think to answer that, one of the last points there about continuing the conversations, a couple of things that we've done following presentations. One, during the presentation, we capture a lot of questions and say, we'll answer them at the end. And so you can continue that conversation. Also, when we have presentations to very large audiences, we agree with the presenter or presenters to kind of stay online or be available for a couple of weeks afterwards. And it's kind of part of that, especially if we're paying them to be part of the agreement. So again, this is an advantage of online rather than offline. Offline at a conference, yeah, everyone rushes down to the front of the stage and mills around and tries to get the attention of the speaker. But you know, online, if the speaker is going to be available for a couple of weeks to answer your questions, that I would say that's an improvement. So I'm constantly looking for ways to not really break the paradigm, but just different ways of achieving objectives, just in a different way. It's not the fact that we're not able to talk with them. It's the fact that you can communicate with someone in a different way. So those are two ways that we've handled this. I can't get to the speaker problem.
Yeah. Well, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to mention that one idea that has worked for me is that, you know, like we have these 5 questions now on the screen. When we know we have groups that are introverted, they're inclined not to talk, or they need time to process, sharing the questions beforehand and saying, these are the questions that we are going to be discussing. I'd like for you to take some time before the meeting to think about at least one of those. And if we break out in groups, then maybe you would like to discuss that group. So that gives them some time to process, okay, I'm going to need to choose a group, and which one of these questions am I going to feel comfortable talking about? Or this is, I mean, it just gives them some time to think about part of the, the process and the question. So that might be another technique that we can use to be more inclusive of those people who need more processing time.
And I think to add to Brenda, I really like that technique, but I found that people like that in smaller groups are more willing to share. The smaller the group, the more willing people are to share. And you can use techniques, if you guys are familiar with liberating structures. There's a great technique called 1, 2, 4, all, where the individual reflects and thinks, and then 2 people share, and then 2 pairs of people get together as 4, and then everybody gets to share. So that's a way everybody gets to speak, which again, in a live environment, often people never get to speak. And I find online is really liberating. I guess, in full transparency, it's really because I've been working remotely for so long, I feel like my time has come. Everybody else better get on board here, This is how it happens in the real world.
Wonderful.
Well, I'd like to follow on top of Brenda there. It's a great idea. We do it at the executive school at DAU with some of our executive courses. We provide thinking questions up front. And we also, when we have a webcast for the acquisition workforce, we'll have in excess of 1,000 people on a webinar. We will pose thinking questions which engage the participants, at least mentally. They may not be able to verbalize it, but they will chat it if they can. So that's a good way to get them to be thinking up front when they come and they participate or just watch.
Okay. Excellent.
Did you give an example of a thinking question?
Well, it's almost what you did here. It's almost the title that Bill used, is how is COVID, let's see, what was the exact title of this event? You can, in the descriptions, you can pose some questions. What was the actual title of this event?
Community of practice on community of practice, community of practices. So kind of the future of community practices, yes.
I think that there was a subtitle, wasn't there, that was more related to number 1?
Let's see here. Yeah, community of practice on envisioning communities of practice after COVID-19.
Yeah, so it wasn't a question, but it was implied, I think.
Yeah. Because, and the question was, is things actually changed? How have they changed? And where are we going with this? And that's why I had these different questions to kind of play on that. And that's why with question 5 here, and we talk about the tools and techniques, and maybe this might be a mercenary attitude on my own point, but one of the reasons I like having communities of practice is to harvest knowledge from them and to build those, bodies of knowledge that we can pass on and mentor and coach folks. And one of the things, and I don't know who said this, maybe it might have been Ben, is how are we actually getting knowledge through now? We have all these online meetings, and we have virtual coffees, and we have all these different things. We have Microsoft Teams, but are we getting knowledge? Are we organizing? Or how are we doing the knowledge part? Building that body of knowledge.
Knowledge versus information.
Yeah.
Well, so that's it. Brenda, you just touched on a topic that's hot to a lot of us, and that is, if we have people just coming and grabbing content, is it a community? And I sat in on a webinar yesterday from Vanilla Forum, who deals with community of practice facilitators. And they had a study they showed about why reasons for participating in a community. And in their take, it's a community it's the private sector, it's retail, it's not for profits. 49%, almost 50% to exchange for information exchange. For friendship, 24%. for social support exchange, it's only roughly 11%. So, you know, a lot of people think communities is a place to go where people build networks and they come and they meet Billy Bob and they become buddies. But the numbers, at least in this case, show that that's not really, they're really there to grab information, to grab content and get things done.
So I agree with that, and that's I think you have to look at communities not as a heterogeneous, homogeneous whole, and you know various numbers. You know whether you believe in 1990, 1% are totally active and driving community, 9% are active and 90% are consumers, or whether it's 80-20 a Pareto rule or 70-20-10, whichever ratios you want to look at. The bottom line is that communities, whether they're communities of practice or not, are really driven by a small proportion of people in the community. The vast majority, as you point out, Ivan, are there to consume. It's a very transactional experience rather than a collaborative social experience. And those numbers I quoted are kind of industry standard and primarily apply to very large communities, if you want to call those communities, and the numbers even out a lot more on the smaller communities. But generally, you're always going to have, you know, a few people, a minority of people driving it. You know, if you're running a soccer team, there's one snack mom, you know, there's one hotel guy, scout troop, there's one person really leading it. And, you know, looking at the diagram about growth and decline of communities, I generally find that communities don't decline slowly. It's like the lead people leave and the community falls off a cliff. It like ends right there and then. So one of the keys to sustaining communities is to have some kind of succession management and deputies and a lot of people sharing the load. But yeah, the point is that not everybody contributes in the same way to a community as everybody else.
So I'm going to do a real quick time check. We have about 5 minutes left. And I hope this was useful to folks. Kind of did a little bit different on my 2 minutes, okay? I thought the discussion was a lot better in my presentation. And just want to give a moment here. Tara or Jamie, do you guys have anything you want to make announcements for the knowledge management community of DC? Speaking of communities.
I don't have anything.
Okay, Tara?
Well, I do have a follow-up. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, on both Ray's comment, and I think Bill had made one in the chat about the sustainability of communities of practice. I worked with an organization, a development organization, that pretty much the knowledge management department stopped doing them. We moved from having about 50 plus to none. And that was because we did all the work, even though our clients said, we want this community of practice that would help us communicate, learn, blah, blah, blah. We set them up, you know, people had full-time jobs, or half of their work program was to maintain these communities of practice. And they worked as long as we did all the work. Once we tried to hand them over, that was the end of it. And so, you know, I came to this meeting trying to, I mean, to a certain extent, I am glad and surprised that COPs work at other organizations, but at mine, they just didn't. So, you know, so my and probably Ray can, I mean, he spoke about succession management and so on, but probably in the minutes that left, those of you who have had successful long-term communities of practice, how have you done it?
Sandy, can I ask you a question? How often did you reach out to your members and ask them what they wanted?
Is that for me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, actually, they were these were COPs that were set up because people asked us to. They were not imposed. We only did, you had to make a request for a COP. And so it's demand driven, not supply driven.
So I'll respond to that. So everything at the World Bank is not rosy, that's for sure. The 400 plus communities of practice vary from highly engaged to on a lifeline. One of the things that we had several approaches. One, we had some kind of triage and acceptance process for a community of practice. Someone comes to us and say, we want a community of practice, then there's we go through why do you want it? Do you have the fund? This is what it's going to take. This is what it's going to take. You're really going to need a community manager, et cetera, et cetera. And most of them go away. So at least we have, we've got, we have some kind of triage and stop people just asking for one. We give them a website and then it fails. And as you say, the central organization does all the work.
Ray, can I quickly jump in? What I find from the CMX and the Community Roundtable and Vanilla Forum, these are people who are managers of communities, is that the most successful communities, and I can tell you in our case, we have 45 of them, are those that have a committed community manager. Call them a facilitator, moderator, what do you want to call them? But it's somebody committed. It's their job. And those are clearly the most successful, as opposed to everybody, part-time jobbers like most communities are.
No, I totally agree, Ivan. And one of the things, one of the other things we did at the bank, and this is really the main role of the team that I'm in, is to train wannabe community managers, or to train people in the art of community management and community leadership. And again, that has helped improve the success rates of the communities. But it's back to the original point. You cannot impose, even if someone says they want one, do they really know what's involved? Mm-hmm. I had an old manager once that would call it feeding the beast. Mm-hmm. So it's really easy to create these, but you've got to keep feeding it. You can create the beast, but you've got to keep feeding it, and that's where things fall apart.
And I think another story I heard, and it's from a lot of people at NASA, and what we've been doing, is you've got to incorporate your community inside of your business units in the work they do, whether it's connected to content in a course or connected into a business unit's direct work, whether it's links to content or links to subject matter experts. You've got to fully integrate it across the enterprise to be successful.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Ivan, and I kind of made it this morning, people talking about lack of time. I said, try not to think of it as, I do my work and then I go and do my community stuff. It's not like I have my life and then go down to the community hall down the street, do my community stuff and come back home again, or come back to work. Your community stuff should be the way you do your work. If you're doing an annual report, do it through the community. If you have other things to do it through the community, brand the community, promote the community. This is the community stuff. This is the way we do it. Messaging come through the community. Your manager speaks through the community. It just should be made, to be successful, it has to be made part of your work, not an additional thing to your work.
Okay.
I'm totally with you, Ivan.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I apologize for it, Ray, but yeah, it's 5:02. This has been great. I appreciate everyone coming on here and contributing. I hope this was useful. And this kind of suggests maybe Jamey and Tara that we may want to have a longer conference, maybe about communities of practice.
Yeah, I was actually thinking we should invite a very specific person to come talk to us about communities, because she's working on some interesting experiments with this in the UK, and maybe we can get her to come talk.
Maybe January or February. Okay, yeah. So thank you all for attending. I hope this was enjoyable, useful. I found the conversation useful. So And Tara, do we have anything set up for December, or are we going to skip that month?
Good luck, Jamie, tomorrow.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Hey, Bill, before you leave, can I ask you a question? What's your view of communities in the long run? Are you optimistic about communities in terms of in the workplace, in the government, or?
My own personal experience, I feel like, and like you guys are saying, they have to be, it can't be just the purpose, but I think in the long run, if we're developing a better infrastructure around them, okay? And I mean, I was experiencing that top down and that didn't work too well. So, I mean, there's this organic piece. And I have found with some communities I'm working with, like with the adjuncts, we're getting together and we're actually getting around the limitations of technology to help each other. So we do the virtual coffees and such. So I think in the long run, they're still going to be around because people want to get together. They want to share knowledge. And they see more than just the purpose, but their identity building. So like with project managers and like with the community I'm involved with, Discipline Agile, we're interested in more like, yeah, we want to learn more about Discipline Agile, but we also want to build it and build a future. So I think it's like if I'm trying to build a profession, a body of knowledge, I can see that working well. And the tools are getting there for that. I mean, in some cases, I told someone I love Microsoft Teams. I just don't like the way some people use it because they don't organize it well. They don't have it correct. And it's not the tool. I hate to blame the tool sometimes. It's how you use the tool.
One last thing for everybody is, now that we're in this pandemic virtual world, how many of you have a list of colleagues they haven't talked to recently and just randomly call them just to say hello? Do it. Everybody should do it. It's easy
I love
to
virtual coffee. I love the virtual coffee. I'm kind of big with my colleagues. I keep saying, hey, let's have a virtual coffee. Let's do this. I mean, Tara will tell you, I'll reach out on Mondays or on Saturdays. Hey, let's have a virtual coffee. As an introvert, I actually like virtual coffees more than big meetings.
I mean, to Evan's point, as long as there's value, then communities will survive. If there's no value, then we're not going to show up. There has to be value. And for it to thrive in an organization, it has to be shared value. The value that the members are getting must be aligned with the value to the organization. Otherwise, they're not going to survive. They're not going to be funded and so on. So to me, the key is always value. It's always what's in it for me.
But Ray, we haven't even touched on metrics. We haven't even talked about whether or not there's value in our communities, how you measure it, what it means, what's engagement, all that. We haven't even talked about that.
Well, I'm in the middle of a 2-month project on metrics and valuing and measuring impact, and it's harder than hell, I tell you. It is.
So this sounds like a good idea for a follow-up meeting. Metrics and communities of practice.
The hardest thing I've found, and in fact, I'm on an interagency call tomorrow.
You working on that?
So, really, really hard.
Steve Newman here with a observation, if I may. Following on your point about alignment and following on Ivan's comment about how we did it at NASA, I actually back in 2001 stood up the first set of COPs at NASA. We did not call them communities of practice. Somebody earlier had observed something like that. At that time, it seemed like KM jargon. We called them work groups. And ROI had to accumulate at the work unit level. And that really was one of the keys to our success. We grew into 725 separate work groups at that time. And that was absolutely a bottoms up. No one dictated it. And the success was based on the fact that the group was formed around the performance of work. And if the person in the process did not see ROI, that is return on investment, they failed. And there were several other KM initiatives that came and went that were top down, but those that were bottoms up succeeded. And again, alignment with work. I agree also they need to be aligned with the enterprise goals and objectives. But the work group approach was very, very successful. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Steve. That's really insightful.
You know, Jamie and Tara, I'm thinking maybe the 2021 can be the entire year of the community.
I would be all for that. I am entirely biased. I'm thinking maybe in December we should have an unmeeting before the holiday and just, you know, practice. Maybe that would be fun to sort of practice some of these things that best practices that we do in these virtual meetings to make them more connection based.
I agree with you because one of my favorite things back when we were all meeting together in person was unconferences. Love those.
Yeah.
I thought they were greatly effective.
Yeah.
I just can't do an unconference online. Maybe we can try that.
Yeah, I'm actually having a meeting in an hour and a half with someone who that's what they do. Online unconference. So
Okay.
I'll get some tips.
Thank you all for your patience and staying a little bit longer. Thank you for the great conversation. Like I said, I hope this was useful. And I thought it was a lot of fun myself.
Yeah, thank
And
you.
watching Ivan keep changing his background was kind of fun too. All right, y'all have a good evening. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bill.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
See you, Jamie.
See ya.
See you, Steve Newman. Good to listen to you.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you,
Happy
Bill.
Thanksgiving. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray.
Thank you for watching KMCDC's presentation. Hope to see you at the next monthly meeting.